Okay, so to start, come up to stand. And take a couple moments, observe yourself standing. For the recording on YouTube, this will be a beginner-friendly lesson. And the real difference between a beginner lesson and an advanced lesson is, I would say, the amount and the way that you're guided through the experience. As you become more familiar with the practice, you probably require a different kind or less support. So to that end, as you're standing there, see what in particular do you notice about the way that you're standing? Maybe you favor one of your legs a little bit. Maybe you notice one of your shoulders is a bit forward of the other one. Maybe you notice that you kind of hold yourself in your belly, you tighten in your back, you hold yourself in your chest. Any of these things sounding familiar? Maybe none of those things. Maybe you're like, I don't know, I'm just standing, I got 2 feet, that's it. All right. So then from there, open your eyes enough that you can take a very slow little walk around the space that you have. And it may not be the most authentic walking for you, but see in the way that you are walking what it's like, what you notice. Do you get any sense of where the effort comes from? If you were to kind of maybe narrow it down to certain muscle areas, where are the muscle areas that seem to be working in order for you to walk around? And then you can walk back to your spot, come lay down on your back. Give yourself a little time to download whatever sensory information you just collected walking around. And have your legs long, have your arms by your sides. If that is not a happy place for you for whatever reason, you can always keep your knees bent and your feet standing instead. If you've got glasses on, you might want to take them off. And if there's anything else, a watch or a belt or a jewelry that's like a little bit distracting, you might not even realize it's distracting, but it could be useful to take that off. And now see, what do you notice about yourself as you're in this position? And when you were standing, I said, yeah, maybe you're on one leg more than the other. How would that translate to this position? You're in the same way, it's just the relationship to gravity's changed, right? So in that way, maybe one of your legs feels a little longer than the other one, shorter than the other one. When you were standing, I said maybe one shoulder's forward. How about that expression when you're on your back? Does it seem like one of your shoulders might be touching the floor a little bit more than the other one? Are there any other details that you can feel about yourself? And then on maybe a different layer, which we don't always talk about in these classes, but I'll just bring it into the room, is you've got the details of how you're configured, how you're laying on the floor, and then you have you observing yourself as a being in the room laying on the floor and noticing where you are in the room and noticing where you are relative to other people or maybe objects in the room. And then there's just this sense of well-being sense of connectivity to yourself. So how are you? What do you feel? It's kind of like meditation in that way, that we learn how to observe and try to not evaluate. Now roll your head a little bit left and right. And can you tell if it's different? Is the feeling different when you roll to the right or to the left? And then what happens if you roll your head at half the speed that you're doing right now? Does anything change? Some of you might notice that when you start slowing down, you actually end up getting a little bit more detail in your sensation. And then leave your head quiet and notice how you're breathing. And feel inside your mouth. Is there anything that changes in the way that you feel the inside of your mouth when you're breathing in or when you're breathing out? Is there space between your tongue and the top of your mouth? Is there any space in the back of your throat? And when you pay attention to your throat and your tongue like that, does anything change in the way that you feel your neck and where your neck connects to your skull? Maybe where your neck connects to your shoulders. Now bend your right knee and stand your right foot. And just to pull up a couple little threads from the lesson we did last week about low back pain, do a little movement of tilting your right knee, just slightly right and slightly left. And see if you can have the movement of your right leg be completely independent from your left leg. Is it possible to have your hips and your back, your left leg quiet enough that the movement's just in your right leg? Okay, and then leave your knee quiet and start to do a movement of pressing through your right foot. Yeah, so you're still your right foot standing and you're pressing through your right foot. You press your right foot down into the floor. And what happens to your hip when you do that? Now, for you guys that were here last week, one of the concepts that we were looking at in the lesson was the feeling of our back, our perception of our back, and starting to feel the difference between an action in the pelvis and an action in the spine. So as you are pressing into your right foot, if your pelvis isn't already, allow your pelvis, your hips to roll a little bit to the left in the direction of your straight leg, so that the back of the left side of your bum, left hip will feel a little heavier. The right side will feel a little lighter. However, try not to lift your hip, right? Try not to use your belly, your back, your bum to lift your hip. Try to find that rolling action from pressing your foot. And what do you notice about your head when you do that? Is there any response in your head? Any change in your mouth cavity? Any change in your breathing? Now let that go. Re-straighten out your right leg and compare the feeling of how each of your legs is resting on the floor. See if there's any difference there, right and left. And then compare the back of your pelvis, right and left side, and your two shoulders, right and left side. And then again, bend your right knee and stand your right foot. And now this time, bring your left arm up alongside your head on the floor, not squeezed in close to your head, just upward so your elbow can be relaxed on the floor. And your left palm is up. Now your right arm is still by your side, but your right palm is also up. Now this time, when you do the movement of pressing into your right foot, let your pelvis, let your hips turn again to the left and start to turn your head to the right. And start to play with your degrees of effort. So try to feel the way that you're doing the movement now. See if you can even kind of zero in on the part of you that you might be using, contracting, and see if you can be open to the possibility of changing a little bit how you're doing that. So maybe it's slightly less pressure. Maybe you do it in a different way. Can your head turn to the right as a mirror of your hips turning to the left? Your head is just turning to the right as much as your hips are turning to the left. Okay. And then keep going, except this time turn your head also to the left when you roll your hips to the left. And what starts to change with the pressure that you feel along the left side of you? Okay. And then come back, bring your arms down, bring your legs down. Feel your contact with the floor again. And then the same position. Stand your right foot, bring your left arm up. Have your left palm up, have your left arm close, as close to your head as you can without any kind of squeezing in your shoulder, without your elbow coming away from the floor. So where your arm can be free on the floor. Your right arm's by your side, your palm is up. Both your palms are facing up. Okay, now this time when you press into your right foot, let your pelvis roll to the left, let your head turn to the left, and start to lengthen your left arm along the floor. And if you can, turn and look with your eyes at your left thumb and notice the way that the back of your head, the back of your neck kind of has to shorten. I would say even do it a few times with your eyes open to actually look and see if you are in fact seeing your thumb. Now that being said, if you feel any kind of pain or strain in your neck or your shoulders or wherever, you don't go that far. That's up to you to figure out. So after you look a few times at your thumb, then continue with your eyes closed if that's comfortable. And start to listen for a sense of relationship from your right foot, as though the pressing of your right foot and the rolling of your pelvis is what helps you to lengthen your left arm. And notice what you think of this. Are you loving the feeling? Are you kind of like waiting for it to be over? Waiting for the next instruction, wondering when it's, where we're getting to. That's all part of the process, is also noticing, all right, so what do you think of this kind of learning experience that we're creating here? How is it going for you? and then let it go. Bring your legs down long, bring your arms down by your sides. And sense your contact with the floor again. And just notice if anything is changing. There's a kind of, well, there's many running gags in the Feldenkrais world, but something that comes up all the time with me when I'm working with people privately doing body work is, you know, I'll say something like, you know, you notice anything there? And they'll be like, well, not really. And I'll be, well, what do you mean? Is there, well, they'll be like, yeah, I noticed something, but it's really subtle. And I'll say, ah, good. Then you're doing Feldenkrais. So yeah, believe it or not, that's really what we're doing here. That like super boring ass, barely there feeling turns into something spectacularly fascinating if you stay with this practice, promise. Right, guys? Mm. Yeah. Okay, stand your left foot. Bring your right arm up, palm up. Left arm down by your side, palm up. And see what it's like in this configuration to press into your left foot and let your pelvis roll or turn a little bit to the right. Check that your belly is as free as possible. And if that seems kind of impossible, try pressing your belly forward a little bit in the way we never want to have our belly, but maybe sometimes we should. And see, what do you notice about your back, right? What happens to your back when you do this movement with your pelvis and your leg? And then join in with your head. So as you're rolling your pelvis to the right, turn your head to the left. And see, does it change anything? Does it make it different? Does rolling your pelvis feel different if you're turning your head opposite to your pelvis? And then compare that. What about if you turn your head in the same direction that you're rolling your pelvis? What's that like? Does that seem like a better coordination for you or not so good? Okay, and then just pause with that. You can keep your configuration. Just give your brain a little rinse for a second. Now, when you're ready, continue pressing in your left foot and rolling your pelvis to the right, and then start to lengthen your right arm and look with your eyes at your right thumb. But notice when you're rolling your pelvis, what's happening to your back? This is really important, and especially for those of you that have a more experience feeling differences. How far up your back is connected to your pelvis, right? What part of your rib cage stays on the floor when you roll your pelvis? And you might discover that one possibility here is that you're rolling onto your right side. But that's not actually what we're doing. We're doing something very, very sneaky, actually, where there's some kind of change that you're creating with your pelvis that influences the position of your spine, that can influence the way that you're able to use your right arm. Okay, and then pause with that. Bring your arms down, bring your legs down. Listen for any differences. Listen for how your experience changes, doesn't change. Listen to how you kind of lost the last few instructions or started thinking about something very interesting. Part of the process. And then stand your left foot again. Have your right arm up somewhere alongside your head-ish. Have your left arm down, palms up. And this time, when you press into your left foot and you roll your pelvis to the right, turn your head to the left and lengthen your left arm down. Is it possible to see your left thumb, or would that be complicated or painful for your neck or your shoulders? Okay, now pause with your pelvis lifted. And just lengthen your left arm and unlengthen it, but keep your pelvis lifted. And then bring your pelvis down. And then turn your face and look at your right thumb. Lift your pelvis, the left side of your pelvis. Roll your pelvis to the right and lift it. Yeah, and then do the same thing this side. So lengthen your right arm. Keep your pelvis lifted. Lengthen and unlengthen your right arm, but keep your pelvis lifted. So think about this. Where are you reaching from? How deep into your back can you start to sense some kind of connection? Do you feel like you reach from the side of your neck, from the back of your skull? Okay, and then bring your pelvis down. And then try both. So you're going to lift your pelvis. And one time you'll look at your right arm and lengthen your right arm. And then come back with your head. Keep your pelvis lifted. And then look at your left arm and lengthen your left arm. And try to go slowly. So you have time to notice the way that you're using your back. What kind of shape are you making? Can you tell the shape of your spine? All right, and then let it go and bring your parts down. Take a little rest, give your brain a break. Remember that what we're doing here is learning how to be in a process like this, learning how to pay attention. So forcing yourself to pay attention is just more forcing, which we are pretty damn good at, right? So just try to be with your process. And now let's see if there's any influence of these details. Okay, so stand just your right foot. And the first thing I asked you to do, your arms were still down. And the first thing I asked you to do was to tilt your right knee a little bit right and left. Do that, see what that feels like. And then do the movement of pressing into your right foot so that your pelvis turns a little bit to the left and come back. And some of you might notice, there's something about the quality of that that's changing. Some of you might think, well, no, I don't know, nothing's changing. And some of you might think, oh, something's happening with my back. Something's happening with my neck and my head. Okay. Now keep your right foot standing. Bring your left arm up, your right arm down, palms up. press lightly through your right foot and roll your pelvis to the left. Turn your face to look at your left hand. Left arm is up, right arm is down. That's it. And can you sense, or maybe it's more like imagine, that your spine is a continuum that goes from the back of your mouth, the back of your throat is where your spine starts, and it goes down to the top of your shoulders, down to the bottom of your ribs, down to the back of your pelvis, and down to your tailbone. And what's interesting is that your spine is comprised of a series of little discs on top of each other, so that not only do some of them bend to the side, some of them can rotate, some of them can bend forward or back. So what do you find when you're pressing into your foot and your intention is just to turn your pelvis and reach your left arm? What happens to those funny bones of your spine? Now, the next time your pelvis is lifted, keep your pelvis lifted. Keep your pelvis lifted as you turn your face to the right and lengthen your right arm down in the direction of your right foot. Keep your pelvis lifted as you turn your face and your head, you look at your left arm and you lengthen your left arm up. And try to go slowly so that you have time to feel what needs to change in the upper part of your spine. What needs to change in your chest, in your neck, your head, so that the movement and the lengthening of your arms can be as comfortable as possible. Okay, and let that go, take a little rest. Check in with your breathing. What's your breathing feel like at this point in the lesson? And notice your overall contact with the floor, the way that you're being supported by the floor. And then stand your left foot and bring your right arm up, keep your left arm down. And now to start with, a few times, just do the movement of rolling your pelvis to the right by pressing lightly into your left foot, and see how that movement's coming along for you. Do a teeny bit of research here and see if you can figure out, for you to be comfortable turning your pelvis like that, is it better for you when you turn your head and look at your right hand, or is it better for you when you turn and look at your left hand? Can you tell the difference? That might say something kind of interesting about how you organize yourself, how your resting muscle tone is. Okay. Now, just pause with that for a second. You still have your left foot standing. Maybe stand your left foot a little bit more to the left. And then if you can, take yourself and bend yourself a little bit to the left so that your left arm is laying a little bit closer to your foot, the back of your head, you shift a little bit to the left. You're in a bit of a curve to the left. And now this time you're going to start to do a movement with your left arm, lengthening in the direction of your left foot. And without pushing or straining, see if as you're rolling your pelvis to the right, your hand actually comes in contact with your left heel. One of my favorite things about doing this work is watching all the funny things that humans do. and the ways with which we avoid doing things differently. We'll do anything in our power. It's amazing. We all do it. It's hilarious. We're just animals in the end. And so one kind of classic example here is if we don't have a lot of flexibility in our back, we're going to do anything in our power to not use our back, right? So for example, you might find that you're using your legs a lot to do the movement, so you don't have to really use your back. That's just an example. Yeah. All right, yeah, take a little break. Is it hard for you to stay in your experience right now? Is it easy? Okay, now stand your right foot. Bring your left arm up, right arm down. Step your right foot maybe a little bit more to the right. Bend yourself a little bit to the right. So you're in a bit of a C curve to the right. And then what happens on this side when you press your right foot and you roll your pelvis to the left? Does your right hand come in contact with your right heel? Now, again, here's where humans are funny, right? Of course, you all can do it. Everyone in this room is blessed with the privilege of the physical capacity to reach your foot. I think everybody can do it. Those of you listening, maybe you can't. It doesn't matter. It's not interesting whether you can do it. The question is, how are you doing it? And if you love to overwork your back, if you already have low back pain, probably you're overworking your back. And probably right now you're going to be like, well, I know how to do this. I overwork my back. So, you know, our learning comes from doing things differently. That means for most of us, go slower. Go so painfully slow because you're not used to going painfully slow. So your brain is like, wow, this is cool. Look at all this information. And even you guys that come all the time, go slower. And if you do come in contact with your foot, could you slide your hand under your heel? And what's it feel like to be holding your heel in your hand while continuing to lift and lower your right hip? And you do it in a way that's not straining your back. And if you can't, then don't, right? You just go in that direction. Some of you are turning your head to the left. Some of you are turning your head to the right. Some of you aren't turning your head. Okay, now pause like that and take a few breaths. You've got your heel standing on your hand. And see what it feels like to start to lift your 5 toes. Your heel stays on your hand. And if your hand and your foot are not connected, your hand is somewhere close to your heel. And you're lifting your toes, but not your whole foot. And see, can you get the baby toe to lift too? See what that feels like to lift all 5 toes and bring them back down. And don't worry about reaching your heel. If you feel like, oh, fuck, I have to strain to reach my heel, just be where you can be comfortably in the direction of your heel, right? And you're lifting and lowering just your toes. Okay. And then lift your toes and then lift your forefoot, but still keep your heel down on your hand or on the floor. And then leave your foot quiet and a few times roll your pelvis and see, did that make any difference in the way it feels to roll your pelvis? Okay. Bring your parts down, lengthen your legs, bring your arms by your sides, take a little rest. Notice the way each of your legs is making contact with the floor. The way the back of your pelvis is making contact with the floor. And the feeling of your low back. And where your ribs touch the floor, where your shoulder blades touch the floor. And notice the direction that your breathing moves. How wide is your chest? And stand your left foot. Bring your right arm up, left arm down. Bend yourself a little bit to the left. And start to investigate how it is to roll your pelvis to the right as you lengthen your left arm in the direction of your left heel. Not by pushing harder and trying to get there, by just seeing what happens. If you do less, use less effort, make the movement less big, and go slower. So you're feeling more weight probably in the back of your right pelvis. And what happens on your shoulders? What direction do your shoulders go relative to the floor? Okay. Now, if you can comfortably touch your left foot, then stand your left heel on your hand. And if that connection is not possible without some kind of strain, then just have your arm as close to your foot as you can. And then feel what it's like to roll your pelvis and come back with your hand pinned a little bit underneath your heel. And if your hand can't reach your heel, imagine that your hand is glued to the floor. So your hand isn't moving. And what's it like to roll your pelvis to the right? Something's happening that isn't about your foot or your arm anymore, right? Something's happening between your shoulders and your pelvis. What is it? Does your chest bone know what your pelvis is doing? Now pause with your hand where it is and start to lift your toes, all 5 toes, and bring them back down. And then lift your forefoot with your toes. Can you lift your forefoot without lifting your toes? And then try to first lift your toes and then lift your forefoot, and then bring your forefoot down and then bring your toes down. Okay, and then pause and see on your own time, does that thing you just did with your ankle somehow influence the way that you turn your pelvis to the right? So you still have this constraint for your left arm, either under your heel or glued to the floor. And you just check and see, and maybe the answer is no, that didn't change anything, but you're just learning how to listen for differences. Okay, let it go, bring your legs down long, bring your arms down. And sense how you're making contact with the floor now. The most difficult thing probably about these lessons is what we're about to do, which is I'm going to offer you a possibility in my instruction. And the difficult part is not the instruction. The difficult part is determining for yourself if that's something that you can do slowly and without strain or contraction. Bend your right knee and stand your right foot. Bring your left arm up and your right arm down. Bend yourself to the right already. Right? So you're in a bit of a C curve to the right. Yeah, the back of your head goes to the right. The right side of your waist is a little bit shorter than the left side of your waist. And already your right hand is a little bit closer to your foot. And then a few times, just do the movement that we've been looking at of rolling your pelvis to the left and lengthening your right arm down to your foot. Try to free up your abdomen, maybe lightly press your belly forward, free up your mouth and your tongue and your throat. You might even lengthen your tongue out as you're rolling your pelvis, or take a big exhale out of the mouth as you're rolling your pelvis, something that might help you kind of tone down the intensity a little bit. And see where your hand comes in contact with your foot. And either it doesn't, or maybe it comes under your heel. And for some of you that already have a lot of flexibility this way, you might find that you can actually hold onto the arch of your foot with your right hand without pushing or straining at all. If you have to push or strain, that's not going to be the variation for you today. So your arm is where your arm can be comfortably. And then stay there. And feel what it's like to breathe in this unique position. So you're not rolling the pelvis anymore. You're just staying, holding your foot or with your hand close to your foot. You're still side bent and you're just laying there, you're just breathing. And notice the way that your back and your ribs and your shoulders and hips are touching the floor. And then put your left hand behind your head. And bring your left elbow to look at the ceiling. And see if when you let your air out, what happens if you just slightly lift your head with your hand? Your left hand's behind your head. Yeah, behind the back of your head. Yeah, your left elbow's toward the ceiling. And then you're just going to slightly lift your head and feel what part of you goes more down into the floor when you lift your head. Let your air come out so that your rib cage can soften a little bit. See if you can let your chest soften a little bit. And which side of your spine goes down more into the floor when you lift your head? Then build on it. So with your eyes, look toward your right heel when you lift your head. Now just rest with that for a second, but stay in this position. Feel yourself in this position. Is it possible, in the way that your foot is and your arm is, to lift your knee in the direction of your chest and bring it back? So if your hand's on the floor nowhere near your foot, then you just do the movement with your leg. And if your hand is holding your foot, then you would use your hand to lift your foot, to lift your knee. And then what happens to the back of your ribs and the back of your pelvis? No, your head's just resting, your arm's resting. You're just seeing what happens if you lift your right foot so that your right knee goes in the direction of your chest. See if you can tell, are you holding your pelvis in a certain way, or does the weight shift on your back? And then for those of you that are holding your foot, maybe you join your head so that you lift your foot and you lift your head. And again, not because you have abs of steel or because you're really strong and you can do it, but because you're curious, how do I use my back? What part of my back do I lean on so that I don't have to pull in my chest or my belly? And if you think, well, that's impossible, then you back it up until it feels like, oh yeah, now I'm back to where things feel super easy. And then just try that a few times, let it go, bring your arms down, bring your legs down, listen for how that affected the way that you feel yourself resting on the floor. And then bend the right foot, bend the right knee one more time, stand the right foot again. And a couple times with your arms still by your sides, go back to our reference movement, press into your right foot, let your pelvis be rolled to the left. And again, just see what that's like for you. Is there anything changing? Okay, let's give it a shot on the other side. Lengthen out your right leg, stand your left foot. Okay. Bend yourself a little bit to the left already. So your left hand is already laying closer to your foot to start with. You could have your left foot out to the left a little bit. Now bring your right arm up long. And first, just start with rolling the pelvis to the right as you're pressing into your left foot, and slide your left arm down in the direction of your foot. If your fingertips come to your foot, maybe you caress your foot a little bit. Maybe you brush your heel, maybe you brush, I don't know, whatever happens there. And again, if you don't reach your foot without pushing, then don't reach your foot, it doesn't matter. I know you don't believe me when I say that, but you will eventually. Or maybe you will never will, I don't know. We all definitely forget sometimes. Okay, then just stay in that side bent position, right? With your hand as close or on your foot or under your heel or under your arch, whatever it is you can do without getting yourself there like that, okay? And then pause there and take a few breaths. What do you observe about yourself in this position? Some of you might immediately be like, wow, I can bend to the side a lot differently one way than the other way, right? That's definitely my experience. I'm in two different bodies. Some of you maybe not quite sure what's different. So you just see. And now stay in that side bent position. Put your right hand behind your head. Point your right elbow forward. And as you let your air come out, just lightly lift your head and look with your eyes in the direction of your left foot. And what part of your back do you lean on? What part of your ribs, your shoulder blades? And it could be really interesting. If you figure out what you're doing, what part of your back you're leaning on, try to do it completely differently, even if the result is not good. I mean, even if the result doesn't get you any farther or whatever. So for example, if you find that you're leaning on your left ribs when you lift your head, what changes if you lean on your right ribs when you lift your head? Exactly. Okay. And then rest your head, rest your arm. And if you're holding your foot, or if you're not holding your foot, start to lift your knee toward your chest and come back. And does that change the pressure of the left side of your ribs, left side of your pelvis, right side of your ribs, right side of your pelvis, shoulders? Which shoulder gets heavier when you lift your left knee? And for those of you that can comfortably hold your foot, see what it feels like to simultaneously lift your foot and lift your head. And keep looking in the direction of your left foot. And again, it's like this word is slippery, can. Well, of course you can, right? Many of you can if you try really hard. But there's no advantage to doing one more variation unless it's something that you can do without strain. You don't need to practice straining. I guarantee you're all straining all day already. So our practice is experiencing something new. Yeah. And then to see, well, what effect does that have? I let my brain experience something new. So what? Well, let's see. Let it go. Lengthen out your legs. Bring your arms down. So what? So what? Does it change anything about the way that you experience yourself laying on the floor? Any parts of you make more or less contact with the floor? Let's see if it changes anything about the way you turn your pelvis. Stand your left foot and do the movement of lightly rolling your pelvis to the right and just see. Do all these weird, random seeming things we did have any effect on how it is for you to put your pieces together? And again, maybe at this point it's no, nothing's really changing. It's a process. And then bring your legs down long, bring your arms down long. And once again, give yourself a nice rest. Give yourself time to reconnect to the floor, the feeling of being supported, fully, unflinchingly supported by the floor. And see what your breathing feels like at the end of the lesson. Notice the way that you sense yourself in the room. And notice how you feel behind your eyes and deep into your mouth. And then check in with yourself and decide if it feels like you kind of just got to a groovy spot and you want to rest for a while. And at some point between now and 5 minutes from now, determine when you want to get up and take a couple moments to observe yourself in standing and in slow walking around, just to see what's that experience like, and is there anything about the lesson that might have changed something about what it's like to be upright. And thank you for coming. See you next week.